For the longest time, we've argued against hero bans, and the 2 or 3 biggest ones. Actually, someone's gonna plug like Frito in the corner over here because like he was kind of right. The biggest issues were always there's not enough heroes.
There's one brig too many. That's what I said at the time. I said, yeah, there's not a lot of heroes, but we have one brig too many. Yo, did I call it or did I call it? Nobody thought I made sense. I was the crazy lunatic on the side who said balance doesn't help, and the entire pro community laughed at me. Hey guys, it's Frito here. Blizzard is announcing their next big step. They've been rumoring and teasing this in interviews. I paid close attention, so I think I know what this is going to be just based on guessing about it. And as we know, they have done the experiments with 6v6 and a lot of different other formats as well. Flats made an amazing video summarizing the state of the game kind of through the lens of 6v6, and we're going to react to that. But first, this was a very key bit of news that's going to be added to the entire story here, where Wednesday, February 12th, 10 a.m. Pacific time, they're going to be unveiling this Overwatch Spotlight, which is supposedly groundbreaking PvP gameplay changes coming for this year. Well, that's a really big word to use, frankly. Groundbreaking. My knee-jerk reaction is like, there's no way they're actually doing something big and meaningful. That's my bias. I think Overwatch is kind of screwed. However, when they say groundbreaking, they're pretty particular about the words that they want to use. And if you follow the trajectory of all of the things they've been experimenting with the past year or more, especially once the actual current team was allowed to implement their own strategies as opposed to sort of finish off the launch window era of Overwatch 2, they've really wanted to try to add new strategic decisions, not just swapping your hero. That's a quote from Aaron Keller in an interview from a few months back. And of course, with like 6v6 and 5v5, they're changing a lot with that. But what's even a layer above that is that they've been playing with the pickable passives or the Junkenstein's Lab that was very well received. And I think it's more likely that the game gets far more complicated rather than simply just adding hero bans. What I think this is going to be is a more elaborate skill tree system with probably a hero ban or draft mode baked into it to make the game more complicated, especially knowing that Marvel Rivals was upcoming. They would have been preparing this because this isn't like something they just figured out as soon as Marvel Rivals popped off, okay? They've been working on this for like a year. And I think a real killer feature for Marvel Rivals is the team up mechanic that makes making diverse team comps much more interesting. You can play around a variety of picks that your team makes to be creative, even if there is kind of a top established meta. And what's even more important to me is that it's a game that is deliberately unbalanced because it puts hero expression and gameplay diversity above competitive balancing. The design decisions and philosophy that so many players of Overwatch are mad about today were lost years ago in a battle that I was laughed off the stage for, because what I said was allow heroes to be unique, do not balance them, but add hero bans for competitive diversity. That is a battle that I went head to head with to the game director himself, Jeff Kaplan, in a blood feud. That is a battle that I lost with the esports community. Many content creators that I would call friends today laughed me off the stage. What a ridiculous idea. No. It's a competitive game. They have to balance it, Frito. Are you stupid? And my whole argument about 6v6 is that it was irrelevant. What matters more is the design of the characters, because they can make the same Overwatch 2 mistakes that you hate in 6v6. For context, I want to show you guys just 2 examples of the craziest things I've seen in this game. Stuff that simply wouldn't have been allowed in the Overwatch community. The point is, we had crazy things in our game, but we went down a design philosophy of balance and try to normalize everything and make it make sense and make Symmetra be as competitive with Tracer and make all of the elements equal when we could have had a diverse game, which is what I had asked for. Look here what happens to my Punisher. The enemy Strange casts a portal underneath him and he almost gets sent off the map. Now he's gonna die here eventually, but he gets kidnapped by a portal. It's an attack portal to suck him down through. This is in no way balanced, guys. It just doesn't make any sense, but it's on a super long cooldown, and this isn't even remotely the most broken thing in the entire game, but is one of the many reasons, and this is the most offensive use of portal I've ever seen, but one of the reasons why Strange is a top pick. He just like does everything. Now here's another example. Wolverine, for my money, is an S tier hero because he dramatically transforms transforms the entire game and is way too much value for basically little input, frankly. He's very forgiving and very strong. He's the worst of all worlds when it comes to a balance decision, but there's so much other crazy stuff in the game anyway, it's not really causing some big community uproar. Now, maybe if it stayed this way forever, it finally would, but for the players that actually care, they have hero bans anyway. But from a design point of view, if this couldn't be banned in higher tier play, there would be riots in the streets. So Overwatch went down a route to try to balance Sombra and Brig and every annoying possible thing. We'll try to make all of the tanks CC immune so they can't get kidnapped off the map. Like, look at that. He just like selects him, can fly with the tank and put him directly where he wants, right? This, like, we get annoyed when Roadhog pulls us off the map, right? For a one-hit kill, but this is a character that is a dive character that CCs you and takes you to Narnia by just looking in the direction. It's insane what Wolverine can do. Now, I think he's overtuned and maybe he should be nerfed and maybe the balance patch was bad, but who cares about any of that? Because so many of the other things in this game do what they're supposed to, right? Somehow, I got left holding the bag for 5v5, a thing I never wanted, I never asked for, and the things I did ask for got ignored by everybody. And so when I talk about Overwatch being cooked and I'm going to go on the I Told You So grand tour is because this is the game I asked for. It's nonsense, guys. It's terrible balance, horrible. But the Blizzard devs have been told by everybody, by journalists, by the community, that they just need to balance better and balance more. Well, I thought that was idiotic and that wasn't going to work, because how is it possible to balance for all tiers of play? First of all, not everybody even knows how to do this. You have to learn the character to get that out of him. So whether it's Hela with headshots or Wolverine with crazy CC or support ults, the execution it takes to play any given character, how do you balance based on the community's skill expression of complex kits? You just can't do it. All right, now let's take a look at Flats' video assessing 6v6.
I did not really enjoy the min 1 max 3. Here's the deal. I'll start with the most recent playtest because I think it's a bit of a nothing burger. The minimum 1 max 3 is not that fun.
It's interesting that he's going to have a negative view on this because this is the idea for role queue in Marvel Rivals that's been vouched for, and I like to call Bin 1 Max 3 short straw matchmaking, which basically means someone gets stuck in a role that they maybe don't want to play anyway.
In a way, I found it actually more enjoyable than 5v5 Overwatch. I found the 6v6 Min 1 Max 3 more enjoyable than the base game. However, though, it felt like freedom without freedom. You're gonna have people who like get forced onto a role, right? Or forced onto something that they're not gonna really want to play. And it's not up to them, right? Like if you are full open queue, right? If you are full open queue and you do not want to play DPS and and there's only DPS left on your team, you don't have to pick it. You can pick something else. Yeah, your team.
Is this really ever a scenario that actually happens in reality?
Mates might yell at you, but the game will not make you. In the mid 1 max 3, you were forced into it, right? Like let's say they pick 3 supports and 2.
Yeah, but I get his point here. This is why I call it short straw matchmaking, because someone has to hold the bag to play tank or heal or whatever. And why should the person who picks last or loads in the game the slowest have to be stuck with that when it's everybody's job to figure the team comp out? And I think this made more sense. Avril makes some good points about this. Like Overwatch had to go through the growing pains of a hero shooter that now Marvel Rivals can benefit from knowing how to make sure it doesn't make the same mistakes. But we didn't really know what we needed a community to do. Like imagine we had the community we have now in Overwatch 1 launch. Well, we've already seen that because we've done the classic patch Overwatch 1.0, and there's things that performed entirely different now with the player base's skill way better than it was then. As an example, way more Widowmaker players, right? like all of a sudden everyone's good at Widow, when at the time nobody was good at Widow. So just the nature of the player base and their skill sets changed, and then also just their knowledge of like, well, more heroes, more playstyles. What do we need to cover this blind spot? There's sort of a flow chart people follow, right? And kind of default into 2-2-2, but it's more important that they actually know how to express themselves in the game, right? And the more educated they are, the more they can handle that kind of format. So I think Marvel Rivals benefits from having some Overwatch players who kind of get placed into the game and get the baseline really high. Like we actually know how to regroup, for example. Like, that's important. Fight together, just regroup. People didn't know how to do that, right? Coming from Call of Duty or other games into Overwatch 1. Now it's sort of more normal in Marvel Rivals. Again, I think if you're in gold or below, perhaps not so normal. And then if you're brand new, which there are many players to the hero shooter genre that are brand new as well, but there was some training wheels there, right? There was something to build off of that with Marvel Rivals that Overwatch just simply didn't have. So that was a disadvantage for its format.
2 tanks. Now you're the last person who hasn't selected yet. You have to pick a DPS character. That felt really weird and odd. And I'm kind of a believer now that the game should either be structured and formal or it should not be at all. And having some kind of like weird middle ground just feels kind of odd. I will say though, the 2-2-2 version needed serious work. I don't think the balance was very good. And I think the fact that they didn't do a competitive season for it is just stupid. It probably didn't bring the best data. I don't know if it gave great data, but it gave nothing to play for. And I think that's something Overwatch has genuinely struggled with the last few years, is why do people play their game?
I will also say that the queue times were kind of amazing for the first few days of 6v6, which was a major downside to why they wanted to get rid of a tank anyway in the role queue format. I thought the test was way too short, and certainly without a competitive rotation, we're not really going to see the things that I was able to show with some great stress testing. Like, I properly grinded that mode, okay? And in my video reviewing 6v6, I showed examples of just how horribly imbalanced it is to have a tank synergy when the enemy doesn't have one. Every single complaint that we have about meta tanks, one meta tank dominating any given rank or any given situation, is the same thing in 6v6. It's just there's 2 tanks that you need to make it, but then it's even stronger. Like, the synergy and oppression of 2 tanks is way more than the oppression of 1 tank. It's hard to force a bad tank in 5v5, but it's impossible to gain any space on the map if, say, you're playing Dorado with Winston Diva versus Queen Hazard or something. All of a sudden now, there's a whole new meta in place where we have a tank line that denies all damage, and you have a tank line that needs to deal damage. Pretty simple. The one that denies damage is incredibly easy for the entire team to play, and then the other one requires some extreme setup. Like, it's not that it can't work, it's just like 10 times harder. While there is hard counters in Marvel Rivals, surprisingly, what I just said doesn't happen, because there just isn't a way to deny too much other than playing triple support, which with support ults, they do that. Support ults are the one way to like survive, but it isn't like the tanks are doing that, just with their cooldowns. Diva's defense matrix as a concept in Overwatch is stronger than some support ults in Marvel Rivals. That's what I think people don't understand about tank synergy. If you use tank synergy on Winston Diva properly, like you're supposed to, like competitive players know how to, and perhaps want to be the base point of the game, that's an exponential amount of damage denial in comparison to either 1 tank or any of the tanks that we have in Marvel Rivals. All that being said, I also do admit 6v6 was more fun. It was more fun, but I liked it in Overwatch 1. Like, what do you want from me? But everyone said they wanted balance, and I said they should have added hero bans instead.
You know what's funny? It's pinned the casual community and the competitive community against each other, because the casual community feels like they don't get what they want, which is a fun game with cool skins that are affordably priced, with good lore and stories around those characters that are fun and have unique, enjoyable kits.
Yo, the lore buff in Marvel Rivals is kind of insane, though. I've never really been big into Marvel, but now that there's so many characters I like in Marvel Rivals, it makes me actually care about the lore, and the synergy of that is kind of insane if you think about it. Like, Disney didn't need any help from me to sell their movies, but they kind of feed into each other. Like, I might actually want to go watch the Thor movies or something with sexy Chris Hemsworth.
The competitive community wants something to grind for. They want to prove that they're the best. They want to be rewarded for playing the best, and they want to have something to show for it. neither one gets what they want.
I think it's important points to add there too. I think competitive players, they want competitive depth. You know, like even the best version of 5v5, a lot of players at a high level won't like it because there just isn't the depth of complexity. It is more simple hero shooter fundamentals, like less hero, more shooter. Whereas Marvel is way more hero than shooter. Everything has some shooting kit to it, to be honest, in Marvel, which makes it a little bit unfair as well. Hitting abilities and shots and melees takes skill in Marvel, thankfully. So it's actually quite a mechanical game. Like there is no such thing as a hero like Mercy or Lifeweaver. They just don't exist, other than maybe I guess Cloak and Dagger is probably the closest thing to something that's easy. But for the most part, almost everything is a skill shot. So the players that want to express their skill, they've got characters like Black Panther, Hela, etc. The players that are more game sense and teamwork dependent, well, you can fill like I do and work with the team ups, solve the team comp, play support. There's lots of ways to contribute to the team, which is what the vibe of Overwatch 1 was, where you felt like there was a variety of ways to help the team. Whereas in Overwatch 2, they really have simplified it to hit shots, and they even give you characters to hit shots. Supports now, yes, they heal, and they have a Suzu to deny the big plays of the enemy, so you are technically supporting, but it's really about hitting shots. While that's really important to not be gone entirely, because let's remember, in Overwatch 1, due to the unchecked no hero ban format, there was a lot of times where you could just pick 2 shields and you just wouldn't be able to shoot the enemy based on the design of the game. Shooter characters could not contribute just because of how damage denial worked. So a lot of their decisions in Overwatch 2 was to make sure that never happened again, so the DPS role could constantly have impact. And then they kind of just wanted to turn all 3 roles into the DPS role. So from a high level point of view, we lost all of the crazy wackiness. The casuals lost it and the top level players lost it.
End up being unhappy, thinking the other side is getting the enjoyable experience. But I will say really quick, I realized something playing the 6v6 Overwatch. The role passives in this game are dog shit.
Yeah,
passives need to go
how many group ups ago did we say this? We said this like a year in, I think. We were like, all right, this passive idea is not working. We knew this already.
It makes no sense. It genuinely feels awful.
It's a marketing gimmick.
That you shooting and pressuring a tank rewards you less than shooting anyone else. And now you might say, Flats, but it's easier to shoot a tank. Correct, but that doesn't mean they're any less valuable. And that goes for healing, and that goes for support. Or sorry, and for damage. And when you're in Rivals, sometimes, I'm using Rivals as an example here, just as like a parallel, when you shoot their tank, sometimes it's because you're 90% to ult charge, and you're like, shit, they have an ult coming up, I need to build this really quick. And so like you will shoot their tank and focus their tank to try to build up your ult, just to get there quick enough. In Overwatch, that doesn't work, because you're getting less ult charge. And also the CC resistance.
This is the big one for me. I wasn't sure if I was going to say it or not. CC resist, I feel, destroyed the tank strategy entirely. Because both tanks in 5v5 are CC resist, and by the way, they don't need to be. This is just an Overwatch 2 thing. This could have been Overwatch 2 6v6. It could be a mistake they made in 5v5 or 6v6. And that, I think that's part of the problem that I have with some of the arguments of one is objectively better than the other, is that a lot of these decisions are clearly independent from either one. Because obviously they put the test in with the stupid passives, okay? So it isn't a 5v5 thing, actually. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with them getting feedback over the years that the tank experience was bad, so you can't be moved. But the outplaying CC or doing it yourself, as an example, the Winston trade, when an enemy Winston dives you, if he's out of position, you can kind of dive him and knock him into your team, or you as the diva in 6v6, let's say, can knock him back into your team. The movement CC battle is what the tank experience was, because that's where the skill is of repositioning everything. So once you take that away, then it's a bit just more about standing there and hitting shots. So you get characters that do that, where they just stand there and hit shots. And that's something that I think should have been gone a long time ago, but they needed to justify Overwatch 2. So we got a long list of things. And I think the community assumes that it had to come in 5v5, but they might revert the game to 6v6 and still keep the horrible role passives, okay, guys? Scrap in for that bad decision to potentially happen. Remove that, and instead maybe skill trees would make more sense.
And all these other things, and also the healing reduction, and also the extra healing passive for supports, which, although that's probably the least offender, the passives just need to go. But that's not the big thing. I'm
Yeah,
I'm going to
passive
say
stuff.
this really quick before I read my late night thoughts to you. Overwatch 2 is in an identity crisis. It does not know
Overwatch 1 was in an identity crisis.
where it wants to go. Years ago, when Overwatch 2 was announced, the game was told it was going to go 5v5. It was almost unanimously thought of as a bad idea. But as people played it, they enjoyed it. And I don't think any of those people are wrong, myself included, because I thought it was good too. And I still do think at that time it was good.
Let's keep in mind what he's talking about. Supports were not very strong, okay? They took some growing pains, and I think they could have left them like that because the community had to relearn how to play support in a more deathmatchy environment. And I think if we just left them there, the game health may have changed. But they threw stats at the issue to try to solidify the backline so the backline couldn't be outplayed. Because at the launch of the game, tanks could make plays on the backline, and a lot of DPS picks were quite valuable because there's just a lot of deathmatching going on. I also really liked that version of the game. It felt more free and expressive and not so counter-picky. So it was just a very different version of Overwatch 2 that we're just never getting back, frankly.
I think there's a combination of things, though. I think after getting no content for years, anything would have felt great. But also, do you know what Overwatch 2 did? It did something very similar to Rivals. It allowed you to re-experience and rediscover the game in a new way. Something Rivals is doing right now for players. They're getting to rediscover the hero shooter genre. With Overwatch, we got to rediscover Overwatch, but it only lasted a few months, because at its core, a lot of the stuff is still the same. But as time marched on, people discovered how to play versus tanks. They discovered that supports needed buffs, and so they got really strong, and then they got really good at playing those supports. And those supports felt like they were really oppressive, but also felt like they couldn't do anything. And then DPS were either...
Yeah, there was an era where the DPS were too weak and the supports were way too strong. Like, it just went the balancing circles, guys. I try to say that's why that you can't expect balance to work, because always someone's going to be left holding the bag when you're trying to balance the game. They could have just added hero bans and so many things would have changed. I just wish they did that in 2019, frankly.
Hard carrying games and running server admin lobbies, or felt like they couldn't do anything at all. But there was no more fun anymore. And so Overwatch decided to lean on balance to fix this. But that's not what it was, just balance. It was also design philosophy, to which most of the characters in this game now feel the same. I am a staunch believer that the heroes, Orisa, Mauga, Hog, Ramatra, and Reinhardt all feel like copy-pastes of the same hero. I was always known as, quote, the Rhine guy in Overwatch 1. Well, guess what?
Okay, hold on. I think you said something really deep there. Let's just break that down. They want to anchor a similar position, more or less. And they just have different cooldowns to play the same positions. And as a Rhine player, Flats will think of the game in terms of the movement pathing outplay. And there was just way more ways to take engagements differently in Overwatch 1. Partially due to 6v6, but just based on the way tanks interacted with one another. And you sort of just can't get away with that in 5v5 as a concept, because everything is built to sustain themselves. Like, all of the characters and the roles are meant to be balanced individually, so you can't really aggress in different ways. You sort of just have to anchor the cart. That's like the long way to say it, is that they're all just different versions to anchor the cart. And while it's a benefit to the average player who doesn't want to learn complex positioning, like in Marvel Rivals right now, when you're looking at things like Wolverine taking you off the map, well, you have to completely rethink where you can even stand, right? Because that is a threat to insta-kill a tank, well, Wolverine existing on the board. So that changes the positioning battle absurdly. And then you've got all of the destructible environments to worry about, like the complexity of how to path and where to position. It's so crazy in Marvel Rivals. Whereas in Overwatch, it starts to get solved a little bit because they balanced it in. So that's like, well, supports can heal each other and won't die to most things. And the tank is so tanky in the front, you can't really get past him. So the formula of how you take engagements in Overwatch 2, partly due to 5v5, but mostly due to the passives and how they've buffed and balanced everything, is really formulaic. So because of that, the characters are designed to be easy to transfer your skill sets from one to another, whereas the uniqueness of Marvel Rivals means that every character is like a unique lesson that you have to learn. Like you have to kind of do some reading on what your character even does in Marvel Rivals. While Overwatch players going to that game certainly had a leg up, right? You might not exactly understand, well, actually Strange will anti-heal himself if his energy gets too high. Like I feel like it took me way too long to realize that's what that was. Right? Like there's weird things. Every character has multiple steps to how they perform, and while you can still have fun at the base level, not necessarily understanding it, there's so much depth to every character that you start to learn lots of nuance with them. And that's something that we lost in Overwatch, because while I really did not like Symmetra as a character in Overwatch 1, because I did not want to have her on my team, the enemy is just going to counterpick with Pharah, and counterpicks were insane against Symmetra. On the other hand, a lot of players really liked trying to maximize that kit. It was a wacky, weird, off-the-wall kit, and Overwatch could have been the type of game where it had more things like that, or Brig and multi-tank, things like that, if we could just allow bans to balance the game rather than expecting wacky things to be in harmony with another through numbers tweaks.
Ryan's boring as shit in Overwatch 2. You lost the hero fantasy. You lost everything with it. You used to be able to hit a big shatter and win an entire game or a entire team fight. Now you get shut down by a Suzu, a lamp.
I love this point, and actually Spilo said a similar one on the podcast we had a couple weeks ago, where he said he gets more multi-kill big Winter Soldier ults in one day than he has Genji blades in a whole year. And that's a character, they're both designed to do the same thing, right? Create team wipes through their reset mechanic. And while Flat's talking about like the tank ults being big, well, yeah, the game has been designed to be deliberately more even, where you can't really make over-the-top plays intentionally. And, well, I don't know if we're happy with that result necessarily.
A boop, a random cooldown, never mind ults. The game has been solved in a lot of ways.
Yeah, because what they want is every individual player to not have to be the fodder for that big play. But then when that happens, when everyone is sustainable like that, they all got a boop and a dash and a thing and a reset and a Suzu, and everyone can survive everything on their own. And you don't need the teamwork. You don't need all of the complex team comp theory crafting to survive. Whereas similar things can happen in Marvel Rivals, and you sort of have to always be reevaluating what heroes you have and how you're going to engage. That's kind of similar to Overwatch 1. The only problem is the top meta strats of like, well, 2 shields or multi-support or whatever crazy combo or OP hero like Mercy Valkyrie, whatever was the top thing to exploit becomes super obvious. And that's all anybody would run in either game, frankly. And then the entire world told Blizzard to balance that.
And so their way of fixing that is to adjust numbers. And so every tank that becomes meta is just somewhat a reflection of either I stand there and shoot from close to medium range, or you play super mobile tanks like your Ball, Diva, Winston, right? With those heroes, they didn't feel as unique. It just felt like you were filling in whatever was needed. But then it goes one step further, where supports start to all feel the same. You're basically this hybrid of doing damage and also doing healing. Kiriko, Ana, Baptiste, all in a way feel the same. They just have slightly different buttons. But like at their core, they're not that much different anymore. Juno is actually even a good example of one that kind of broke the mold for a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know if I necessarily agree. I think Juno is incredibly formulaic and just does that. Like, she adds speed, obviously, but everyone loved Juno's kit. And my criticism of Juno was that she doesn't have flavor, whereas each one of these has a flavor cooldown. But I think what he means is, in your team formation, you're not really going to do anything elaborate, mainly because the tank battle is as simple as it is. Whereas maybe you had more tank interactions to think about with how you use those other cooldowns, because the tank gameplay is so simplistic, then you're really just worried about duels from this position. And yes, you're going to play around your lamp or your anti, but these players play on their own, whereas the tank sort of hides most of the game, right? There just isn't really a tank battle being had.
Where you got to have everything. You got to have a juiced up kit. But with time and with nerfs and with changes, Juno just feels like another sit there and spam heals, sometimes run away, sometimes do some damage type of character. They don't have uniqueness. They don't have identity.
Yeah, another one that really stands out is Alari. After the health changes, really just wasn't really functioning as a character. On the other hand, I think Alari being meta at launch was some of the worst Overwatch 2 gameplay we had ever. So I don't really know where to put that. But Alari and Juno, they're just two heal characters with very, very minor utility and don't add a lot of flavor, right? Everyone's mad at the design of Brig, and I don't actually hate Brig at all. I just think she should have been bannable in Overwatch 1. And in 5v5, I think she's okay, does the function that she's supposed to. The entire community was up in arms about the Kiriko character, who had an insane kit for so long, and then eventually just slowly got overlapped by these other characters that came out. Either Alari was too good at launch, or now Juno is clearly better than Kiriko. And what I kept trying to tell you guys is just ban one of these and allow them to have identity, flavor, and nuance. How many Alari Junos can they actually add to the game? Do you want the game to just be about shooting mechanics? Because that's what they are. I don't want more Moiras added to the game. I think Kiriko is a thing people have been asking for. They wanted a cleanse. Now, I'm glad that it eventually stopped doing every single possible effect. I mean, it used to be able to knock you off the map and get a kill with it, potentially. It's just, okay, it doesn't have to do everything. What I wanted is the game to be about cool things like Kiriko. The balance is kind of irrelevant, because all balance does is change who is on top, what you're going to reward. The best decisions you can make with balance is making sure the most palatable gameplay is being rewarded that you can. And Kiriko is a very cool design. Would I rather have Kiriko be meta or Juno? Honestly, I might pick Kiriko, personally, but you could ban whatever you wanted if you had a ban phase. I think Juno is a bit of a boring character to watch. Very fun to play, I'll give you that. But if I had to choose, I would say supports should be more transformative, not more general. That's what makes hero shooters interesting to me, but now we get to watch these two games go on their own paths, right? So I don't necessarily have to get what I want in Overwatch, because what I want is in Marvel Rivals. It's that wacky game.
They feel kind of odd. I'm going to read this now. I personally think the game feels better in 6v6, and that they made the wrong call years ago to go 5v5. Back then, everyone was pretty much on the side of bad idea, but with time and with playtesting, people loved it and thought it was better, myself included. As time has marched on, I've begun to believe the reason we thought that was because we were so deprived of content for so long, that all this fresh stuff made it feel much better. That doesn't mean it wasn't better. For a time, it in fact was, until people figured.
This is a very nuanced take from Flats, and I love it. Great. He wrote this in his Discord. I will add as well, what matters most to me is being able to move on the map. So what I hated is that in 6v6 Overwatch 1, there was so many cases where their tanks countered your tanks and you couldn't move. Now that actually still happens in the 6v6 test, which is why I think it badly needs hero bans if it goes back to 6v6. Some major benefits to Marvel Rivals in that tanks don't mitigate the same amount of damage as they did in Overwatch 1 or 2. The structure of the map is better for me because there is destructible environments for you to traverse, and in third person, there's just a lot of ways to navigate the map. So movement and repositioning, that matters a lot to my personal gameplay experience, because I don't want to feel like I only can shoot at the front line, and if we don't clear the front line, we can't move. I hate that so much. If the enemy is on Reinhardt Diva and they're stuffing a choke and we're playing Roadhog Queen, which will happen and has happened in those games, you kind of just don't get to interact with anything in the game. One tank line functions and the other tank line wants to play a different video game. The other tank line is playing Apex Legends, and then another one is playing Overwatch 1 and clowning you like it's the Overwatch League Grand Final. But ultimately, what is more important to me is that in 6v6, the higher highs are worth it. That's what's crazy. That's where I have to admit the 6v6ers were onto something. My only problem is the only arguments I ever heard were about it's easier to balance. There's more character diversity. These are things I thought we cared about. That's definitely not true. That's not true at all. The opposite is true. But higher highs and lower lows are definitely more interesting for gameplay.
Figured out how to play it. Balance had been flipped upside down, but now every hero feels the same in some way. The uniqueness of each hero that brought this game to life feels so neutered now. Some may blame this on balance, and those people would have a great point. However, Overwatch has this problem where it is a solved game. Patches are figured out within 2 to 3 weeks at maximum, and when there's pro matches that are on and being broadcasted, it's even less time than that. But that's not all. The perception of balance is all over the place, with bronze gamers and GM gamers being completely at odds. But one place they would likely agree is fun, and both are likely not having a good time. That was just my self-thoughts the other night. It's something I wrote to myself the other night, just so I had an idea of what my brain was, where I was at. I think the correct decision for Overwatch is to return to 6v6. Here's the deal. Even if we flipped to 6v6 tomorrow, it would not solve the problems of Overwatch. The big elephants in the room still exist. Queue times. People are not going to wait 10 plus minutes for queue times.
We don't necessarily know if that is or isn't the case. It wasn't for the first week, but I don't actually know. I don't know if anyone is 100% certain whether queue times will hold. The launch era of Overwatch 1, there was just simply way more damaged players, and the game was designed for that intentionally. Tank synergy and tank being meta and, as Flat said, solving the game was not something that the designers intended. We have quotes from the developers saying this over years. The whole push towards single tank was a concept Jeff had originally, and he justified it because that's how it was played in 6v6 originally at the start of the game, until they started to rework D.Va in the second year. Then tank synergy becomes like what you expect to function as a team. But that wasn't the design of it. It was like an accidental happenstance.
6v6 2-2-2 roll queue will not save this game. 6v6 in general would not save this game. 5v5 staying out as it is with better balance will not save this game. This game is in an identity crisis. Hero bans would help. Absolutely. Hero bans would help. Hero bans would not change where this game is at today. So I guess the question is, how does Overwatch reinvent itself? Because I feel like...
Yeah, and I think the blog post is the answer to that, right? The big announcement that's coming up in a couple weeks.
We've kind of lost the plot. Basically, the way I think about it, Overwatch is in a knot. It's in a big, yarn knot, right? And before, you used to be able to pull on one or two strings and solve some big problems. You can't do that right now. It's not possible. It's so tightly wound up that you'd have to spend so much time. You ever had like a really, really bad knot on something? Like your shoes or your pants or something.
Right. And this was my big issue with thinking that 5v5, 6v6, or 7v7, as Flats advocates for, changes much of anything. What the number of players changes is how expensive the map is and how chaotic the gameplay will be. How many ultimates will be in play, how much fodder there is for your D.Va bombs and Genji blades. That changes a lot. And that's really, really important. What the community, for some reason, automatically assumed, which just isn't true based on design and how design works, is that all of the decisions they maybe disliked about Overwatch 2 were because of 5v5. What's so important for me to try to tell you guys is that is not the case. And what Flats is talking about here is the design philosophy. That's what matters most, right? Like, every character has to be self-sufficient in Overwatch 2. We don't want you to need teamwork to function. That's a core principle of how all the characters work now. And so if we go back to the world where your characters kind of get hard countered or can't function or get auto harassed without the help and peel and teamwork and synergy, that's a whole nother game that we could have kept in Overwatch 1, but we didn't add hero bans. Instead, they went through reworking all the characters, and it started in Overwatch 1 in 6v6, which is why the number of players is kind of irrelevant to this point to me. We don't even really talk about one tricks anymore in Overwatch 2 or the modern age of any of these games. They don't really matter so much in Marvel Rivals, I don't think. Thankfully, maybe. But in Overwatch 1, one tricks, especially on niche heroes, were incredibly destructive to the game experience. So what they did, rather than add hero bans, which would have lowered the overall peak power of any given team comp, they instead made it so that the one tricks could be more useful teammates more of the time. And that ruined some of their identity because they weren't allowed to be niche anymore. They had to be able to compete with the mainstay heroes. That was a mistake. I said it at the time. Because back then, if you got a Symmetra one trick on your team and the enemy ran the common meta strat, you had to play the Symmetra comp. And what I mean is you had to know you're not gonna be able to shoot up at a Pharah with that character. You have to overcompensate for that pick from a team strategy point of view, which is happening every day in Marvel Rivals, where maybe you've got 1 healer, 3 healers, multiple tank, 1 tank, multi-DPS. There's lots of different ways to play, and it's not like every character contests every other character. You have to somehow figure out how to do the most from your own individual playstyle, which is unique in every case, as opposed to everyone being hero shooter guy, and we're all hero shooter guy, and we all have a chance to pop off all of the time from any position. That's not the case in a more diverse and uniquely designed hero shooter game, which Overwatch 1 was, and Marvel Rivals is to like a 10x degree.
Like that. And you have to like sit there and like really like knead at it or grab a knife and like, you know, kind of like push at it and try to pull it out, you know? You have to do that with 100 knots because they're all intertwined. And there isn't one thing that needs to be changed. There's 50 that need to be changed. I think we all, every one of us, gets hung up on our own spot of the knot because none of us are wrong and it's not any of ours fault. If you are somebody that thinks the prices are outrageous, you are not incorrect. If you are somebody who thinks the balance is bad, you are not incorrect. If you're somebody that thinks Rhine is OP, you are not incorrect. If you're somebody that thinks Mauga is OP, you are not incorrect. If somebody who thinks that the game should be 6v6, you are not incorrect. If you're somebody that thinks the game should be 5v5, you are not incorrect. Because every single person who has an issue with any of these things has a good point.
Which is why I didn't want them to be designed by committee. I want to know what they think the game should be. And Overwatch 2, well, yeah, they listen to the community, but they're bending over backwards to redesign the entire game over and over again, and I don't know if that's a good idea. Does Marvel Rivals look like a type of game that they focus group tested from every possible sub-community of player base they could have? Or is it obvious that they come out guns blazing with the identity of what their game is and will be about? I think a huge problem that Overwatch sets for itself is it defines itself as a game that says it's going to be a hero shooter with reasonable balance. So then the community expects that to be the case, and sometimes they just don't know what the heck they're even talking about. Like, we see comments, I say this on Twitter, you should follow us on Twitter to see the dank memes on there, but once in a while, you see a comment where someone's like, well, I'm finally quitting Overwatch after 6 years. They still haven't nerfed Genji. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, is this a troll comment? So sometimes we don't know, right? Like if it's a legit troll comment or not. And if you're a metal rank player, well, Genji's been a nightmare for you for your whole career. And if you're not playing Moira, who hard counters him, well, then maybe you think he's unbeatable and way too strong because he can double jump and you can't look up. It's harder on a controller and whatnot. Like, this is what Flats is saying. Like, everyone has their own unique perspective of how they experience the game, and their pain points are all valid.
And I think that's at the core of the problem. We've gotten paralyzed by fear. And it's not just us who is paralyzed by fear. It's also Overwatch. They don't make big changes. They're scared. They're scared of reaction.
I mean, yes and no. Like, isn't the health overhaul a big change? Wasn't 5v5 a big change? I don't know if I agree with this. I think they do change it all the time, but they change dumb things like 5 meters of range on Cassidy every other patch or something like that. Like, what difference does that make, right? What fundamental gameplay engagement knowledge is this changing in the game if we just, all of a sudden now Soldier is a bit better at range than Ashe was a patch ago? I hate these changes. Those kinds of changes I think are dumb. I think if anything, they changed the game too much with meaningless changes. Marvel Rivals Season 1 came out, the patch released, it was kind of bad, but we've had it for weeks now, and we've been able to develop the meta, and the bans have changed, and certain things are OP, and if you get a Storm in your lobby and it goes unbanned, oh my god, does that pop off? Or if your team forgot how to handle a Wolverine, that pops off. Marvel Rivals is horribly balanced because certain heroes have a way outmoded impact on the carry impact of the game, but that adds for so much more nuance and depth to the strategy. And actually, something that's very important to me as a player, it allows for supporting playstyles, right? We used to have that in Overwatch where there was carry picks. We used to say that. Can you carry as a support? Was it even possible? There was a time where Lucio's damage was hardly impactful at all, and it felt impossible to win a 1v1 on him. Well, then they eventually over time made it so that every character can win a duel always. Everyone's a shooter character. Well, duh, now everything feels the same. Of course it will. That's what is going to happen. In Overwatch 1, I loved picking the roles and learning the ways that kept the team together, knowing the interactions of the team and how you can know the fundamentals of the game to help your team even on a supportive style playstyle, who maybe you're not designed to be the one where all of the resources goes and all of the carry comes from, but you can make big impacts that ripple effect in the hero shooter economy, because it's all about keeping your team alive and negating damage, dealing damage, comboing together, making space. There's so much complexity in Marvel Rivals that we just don't even come close to. Overwatch 1 isn't even close, in my opinion.
And you can tell they're scared of reaction, because anytime there's any backlash, they jump at it super quick now.
An example for me is when they did that really ridiculous Sigma ult change where all of a sudden he can grip you through a wall. It was way overpowered and dumb. And the community says they want dumb things, but then something's clearly overtuned and they don't let it ever be overtuned. We must have balance in Overwatch. That's what the community says it wants. But we can clearly see how fun it is when we don't have it in Marvel Rivals.
And it's a good thing. I want them to try to make changes when they do things incorrectly.
Who's to say what's incorrect though, Flats? That's the problem I have with this argument. We all disagree. So just let every rank ban heroes to their heart's content of what they think they don't want to play against, and let the hero identities be crazy.
But they're also,
because then you can keep the hero fantasy that you said that you lost.
Lies the issue that they won't take the risks to make new stuff or to create new things. Because what if, I'll give you a good example. For the longest time, we have argued against hero bans, and the 2 or 3 biggest ones. Actually, someone's gonna plug like Frito in the corner over here, because like he was kind of right. The biggest issues were always there's not enough heroes.
There's one brig too many. That's what I said at the time. I said, yeah, there's not a lot of heroes, but we have one brig too many.
You don't want to lose the freedom of expression of being able to swap heroes to whoever. And you know, what about those people who only play Overwatch to play one thing, right? Like if you play Overwatch and like you want to play Mercy, right? And you get into a game and you want to play Mercy and Mercy gets banned, then now you don't want to play anymore, right?
Play quick play, scrub. That's what we should have said. Play quick play if you only want to play one hero. And dude, listen, I play Hulk in Marvel Rivals. I say I play Hulk. I played Hulk on SR Reset. Then for weeks, I don't get to play Hulk because nobody wants to play against the Hulk Iron Man team up. So I get this. One of my best heroes gets banned every game. So I don't know. What do you want? The thing is, what he said, the main thing that is the worst problem is losing the hero fantasy of his favorite character, right? That's so much worse than not getting to play them every time in ranked. Yo, did I call it or did I call it? Nobody thought I made sense. I was the crazy lunatic on the side who said balance doesn't help, and the entire pro community laughed at me. All of the journalists said Overwatch 1 was ruined by bad balancing. I don't agree, man, because any way they balanced it, it still sucked. But what's shocking to me is this other game can come out and like it designed in a way that I could never have imagined any hero shooter game to be designed. It's as if they did only the things I asked for, right? That's how crazy this is.
We cater to too many people and we try to make all of these things work, and it doesn't. We can't do it. And that's where the problem lies with our identity of the game, is there is no way out. We're in that department. Because even if Overwatch...
Well, old Team 4 wanted the Mercy and Moira and Symmetra mains of the world to always get to play their hero if they wanted, but have a competitive rule set, right? Why does that have to be the culture in ranked? That's what I was talking about when I said Overwatch 1 had an identity crisis. They were bending over backwards for individual one-trick heroes as if we were playing an RPG game. Remember, these are MMO devs that made Overwatch 1. They just weren't equipped to handle the realities of making the tough decisions of a competitive game with a competitive rule set. They could have bent over backwards for the one-tricks, for quick play all they wanted. We got a small version of this in Overwatch 2 where I said, well, why isn't there ways to like customize your player card for the characters you play most and express who you are and what you like about that character? Oh, that's another thing Marvel Rivals took, by the way, because you get a fancy avatar if you put enough time into a character and do all their challenges. Why don't we have that in Overwatch? And if you play the competitive game at the ranks that have bans, personally, I just think it should be rank wide. Did we really go down years of having the potential of Overwatch destroyed because Jeff Kaplan didn't want to hurt the feelings of a Mercy one trick? That's honestly what happened.
Overwatch tomorrow went for 6v6, you are now going to piss off all the people that loved 5v5 and alienate those people away. And
I'll be honest, I think most people are a bit neutral. I think that's the majority of the player base, is it kind of doesn't matter. And I think I do know some shooter-based players that will prefer the amount of space and angles and shooter gameplay emphasis in 5v5, but I think the overall casual experience prefers the big explosions of 6v6, just as a general concept. But the meta theory crafting problem of it, I think it becomes much more crucial to have a good comp and good heroes in 6v6, whereas you can get over it a bit in 5v5, but again, it's still got problems, you still got counter picks, you still got a million things that are a byproduct of all of the issues any hero shooter will have.
they might leave. And those are your people who currently play. And there's no guarantee that the people that want to play 6v6 would ever even come back. There is no guarantee. So let's say tomorrow you decide to go 6v6 and all the 5v5 people leave and no, the 6v6 people don't come back. Now what? What do you do?
You're screwed. These
I think are the fears that paralyze the
Overwatch is cooked.
I personally think the 2-2-2 version of Overwatch is the best version. I think Overwatch is a bit of a solved game and that role queue was necessary. I think in a game like Rivals,
that's a hot take. A lot of people don't like role queue. I don't know if I think role queue is necessary in the Overwatch 2 map design. I think it was clearly necessary because they made choke points where you needed a tank to even bypass. In Overwatch 1, they intentionally wanted you to need a shield to survive through a choke. Whereas Marvel Rivals, every character's third person, can break through a wall, you can flank around, like movement's baked into the game. And so 6v6, it's kind of irrelevant. And while certainly in Marvel Rivals, you can play with your tank or having healing is certainly important, you can just go off on your own and individually get a kill with your own pathing and gameplay, just smashing your cooldowns together on a whole bunch of heroes. That kind of wasn't the case in Overwatch, honestly, where they would have a comp where you cannot make an impact on intentionally as a solo player. You had to have a team together. So that design difference between Marvel Rivals and Overwatch is very, very different and has kind of nothing to do with 5v5 or 6v6. It has to do with things like mechanics like a diva defense matrix, meaning that, well, if you are in a winning position, one player will never be able to make an impact if that diva player has their monitor on. And maybe that's the way it should work. But I think it's very problematic that you can build team comps in Overwatch where you're safe from the front and the back. But equally, it's problematic in 5v5 if they made every character self-sustainable anyway.
Role queue is not necessary because it has more dynamic and it encourages team play with things like team ups. For example,
which I think Overwatch is just straight up steal, okay? Lower buffs, make it happen. Give them a crazy ability. I think the individual skill tree passives and lore buffs should be added to Overwatch. That would be fun.
If you have someone on your team playing Storm, you can lock Thor to give them an extra ability and give them, more ability to do more damage. You can be a good teammate by swapping and playing something with them. It rewards you for doing that. Overwatch has no such systems in place.
I think also they've got the crazy OP cooldowns that are like an ultimate, but don't charge in the way that an Overwatch ultimate casts, which is closer to a MOBA game, by the way. Like ultimates in MOBA games often are on a very long cooldown, so there's no building up, there's no playing better and building up to one. You just get one shot at it. So the strange portal we showed earlier is effectively like an ultimate, but might take longer to build in a way, and are more situational than an ultimate. It's like a couple team fights that it takes for it to come back. That's kind of insane, and nothing in Overwatch is like that.
And so thus people will end up wanting to be more selfish and playing whatever they want. And Rivals has a problem with people already wanting to just play DPS or whatever. They have an issue with that. And they'll probably bump into more problems, right? The reality is these extremes don't represent most people. Plenty would play either 5v5 or 6v6. Well, yes, if the game was fun. But that's the whole point of my not theory. My whole idea of my not analogy. It's more than that. Flipping the game to 5v5 or 6v6 tomorrow doesn't matter. A lot of people don't think the game is fun because they've lost a lot of the identity. They think that a lot of the tanks feel the same. They think all the tanks feel like raid bosses. They think the prices of skins are too high. They think that the format is bad, or queue times are too long, or the fact that there's no story and there's no lore. There's nothing that connects you to the game. There's a million things that also...
Which made flats. There's going to be a new story drop on the next collab skin that put out a 2-minute trailer for that.
So we're on top of that. So even if we tomorrow decided as a community this is better, it needs more help than that. I don't have an answer on like, this is the way. I personally think the 6v6 stuff is more fun. When I played the 6v6 mode, I felt like that personally felt more like Overwatch to me than Overwatch today. To me, that felt like Overwatch that I remembered and that I felt deep down. I don't know how to put that into words outside of that. The best way I can describe it to you is that when I play Rivals, it feels like old Overwatch. When I played 6v6, it felt like old Overwatch, but it felt not the same. It felt almost like a shell. But I felt like a lot of those problems could be also changed, right? Like they could be fixed. It would just need a lot of work. What about 7v7 you promised us? Oh, I still think they should have tried. I think they should try 7v7. I think that this is a great time. They should go back in the kitchen and go take a look, because queue times are the big problem, right? That's not going to go away. Queue times is not going to go away. And flipping the game tomorrow onto 6v6 will not solve the problem. If any.
All right, for the longest time, I thought 77's a pipe dream crazy idea, but the more I think about it, I don't hate it. Like either way, I think obsessing over the number of players is a bit of a nothing burger, but if we're going to have tank synergies that can mitigate mostly all damage, so the problem with 77 is what he wants to do is add another DPS, and so that means the tank line is going to die much faster, right? Because their death ball versus your death ball, both teams could do way more damage. So the necessity for damage mitigation will be even higher than in that. Whereas in 5v5, damage mitigation is at its lowest point, right? Because yes, you can pick it, but because you can only put it in one spot of the map, well, then you always can flank forever. Whereas in 7v7, or let's say 6v6 first. Whereas in 6v6, you have the perfect amount that if your tanks counter the enemy tanks, the entire enemy team might be gummed up by your Winston Diva. You cannot fight anything but them, and nobody does damage, you get shut out. What 77 would do would mean when you counter the enemy's tank line, you win much faster. But also when you don't, then there should be another player to be able to go take duels that the tanks can't enforce. It'll give you like a bit of that 5v5 effect, and it starts getting closer to a crazy game like Battlefield or something, where there's just too much stuff to track what's going on. So much bigger impact plays both on the flank and in the ult fight. Like ults are gonna go crazy in this, and the team that has the ability to set the tempo of the fight might hard steamroll. Like steamrolls would be much worse, I think, in 7v7, because if ults are going to have impact, right? If ults are good, then the team that's setting the tempo of a fight in 7v7 all of a sudden is like super snowballing. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation for another day. Like I don't know, man.
Anything, you'll create new problems. And those queue time issues are real, and they are big. They absolutely are. And I have no idea how to fix it. But also, you know what? Let's take it a step further. You talked about my 7v7 theory. One of the main things that went against my 7v7 thing was people said, what about visual clutter? And what about all the shit that happens on screen? Brother, you are playing a hero shooter in the year of 2024. You know what you signed up for.
25 now.
If you complain about visual clutter, and I don't mean like, oh my God, I can't see anything in the moment, right? Like I'm talking like you sit down and write a 9-page novel on why visual clutter. 2025, shut up, chat.
I also agree. I agree, and I think they didn't even fix visual clutter in 5v5 anyway, because all the characters have like half of a more ability and more movement, so I find it harder to track than most of the Overwatch 1 gameplay, which was so much more deathball-y anyway. So it was much easier to track where everything was because you kind of had to deathball and play together much more. Whereas 5v5, there's a flank threat all the time. All of a sudden the Kiriko's in your backline multi-taps you, then TP's out. So the movement game and just how brawly it is, it's so much faster, especially when you compare to Overwatch 1. So I don't think the number of players really changed that. And well, while on one hand, they got rid of all of the shield clutter, perhaps, the visual clutter and tracking the game, I'm completely with Flats on this. Marvel Rivals is a mess too. It's hard to tell, like, is that my cloak ult? Their cloak ult? Oh, whose Invisible Woman ult is this? What's going on? This explosion. Like, it's absolute nonsense in that game. And well, that's part of the skill of learning these games and also appreciating and enjoying them.
You read a 9-page novel on why it's so bad, right? I'm like, dude, you're playing the wrong game. I've been playing Rivals for the last month, and I can't tell you how many people have come into my chat and they're like, hey, I play Fortnite. Hey, I play Valorant. I play Apex. You know, I've heard about you from Overwatch. I came to learn, you know, whatever it is. And they'll say, like, how do you keep up with stuff in fights? It's so easy to me because I'm experienced and I've learned to do that throughout time.
Yeah, I love this. And I also think this is just one of the many criticisms that the devs heard in Overwatch 1 and that they were boundly determined to fix. That's the thing, guys. It's not that they don't listen to feedback. They did. They did listen to feedback. And then they eroded the heart and soul of the game for that feedback.
But you know what happens if I go to play Valorant? I look like a lost puppy. I get flashbanged twice and I go, where the am I, right? Because it's experience and it takes time. And I don't think catering to those people is even a great idea either. If the experience of the game is better, if having more chaos is fun, I think that's just a byproduct of it. But again, this is one of those things where it's like the complaint has been heard that there's too much visual clutter. And so thus, maybe they hold back on cool abilities, or maybe they hold back on, say, trying the 7v7, or they hold back on trying these things because they don't want to make those people upset because they've voiced concerns and complaints.
Designing a game this way is ridiculous. Why do this? Why do this instead of just make the game you want to make?
And so they get, what's it called? It's like choice paralysis or paralysis by analysis, choice paralysis. Yeah, there's a lot of... You know what I'm talking about when you get paralyzed by fear or indecisiveness? I mean, I forget what it's called. Analysis paralysis. Yeah, they get stuck. They get stuck. Oh, I forgot to talk about this. In 5v5, some heroes just don't make sense. Actually, some heroes in 5v5 feel good and make sense, like Junker Queen or Kiriko, but some feel bad unless they get super buffed, like characters like Zarya or D.Va, to which then people end up hating them. They were designed for a whole different game. Ryan even feels skillless to me now. It used to feel great, chess matches could result in full team fights, and now it's gone with a cooldown. I mean, how often have you seen, like, when Zarya gets super buffed or D.Va gets super buffed, right? They become meta and everyone goes, oh! Well, there wasn't problems before. I think when Overwatch swapped over to 5v5, there was a lot of promises made to make the game more adjusted to 5v5 with characters that just didn't work. D.Va didn't work. Zarya doesn't work. They don't work. Their kit makes no sense in a 5v5 sense. They make sense in 6v6. Hog as well. The thing is, though,
I don't really agree with this because I think if you look at the pick rates and win rates for the average player, what he means is they don't make sense at his tier of play, which I totally get. Like, there's almost no reason in most iterations of any balance we had in Overwatch 2 to ever pick D.Va over Winston unless she's just overstated. So he's not wrong, but it's just a high tier point of view. Zarya is an amazing pick for the average player. And the thing is, in our community, we got stuck having this debate. The debate I'm having right now with him is totally irrelevant. Hero bans. That's all we need is hero bans, okay? Because it's like, we can have the same debate about any given hero in Marvel Rivals, and I could be like, well, Scarlet Witch is actually really good for most players, but just isn't going to be useful against the Hela in top 500. We don't even need to have that debate in Marvel Rivals because we have hero bans, right? And we don't need to expect every single hero to work. Like, why do you expect, whether you're in 5v5 or 6v6, and it's going to sound like I'm attacking flats here, but really it's literally every single high-level player doesn't know how to stop speaking like this because they all view the game this way because they're so good at the game. They solve it so instantly where they just don't realize the blind spots of what they're saying. Why would you want heroes whose design is not meant for your level of play to function at your level of play? We would never expect Scarlet Witch to be buffed up to compete with Hela in Marvel Rivals. But when you say that they don't function in the format, then you're robbing the experience of the 99%, or in his case, the 99.9%, where if you look at the pick rates of D.Va in Overwatch 1 and 2, she's one of the most picked tanks at every rank and does succeed and wins the game at different versions of the balance, right? D.Va is an amazing hero in 5v5 for the average player, because she's kind of easy to play, frankly. A whole lot of defense without a lot of mechanics and can play around teammates flexibly. Zarya, similar thing. You got a feeding teammate on any role, a feeding Genji, all of a sudden now you have charge. Like, what do you mean that doesn't work in the format? No, that works as an Overwatch. That's worked ever since the launch of the game. And I think what he forgets here is in Overwatch 1's history, you got a lot of single tanks. It wasn't like everybody agreed and always filled into 222 in ranked Overwatch 1 before we had roll queue. Part of the reason we got roll queue was because they didn't. And in Overwatch, this entire casual perspective that I try to voice is just shouted down, ignored completely. We've lost the ability to contribute to this conversation because every major voice now is a streamer who's a top 0.1% player. So it's impossible to break through the established consensus on these ideas. And what I'm saying is more of the open-mindedness that the game was originally designed on, the things that Jeff Kaplan and the other members of the team stated were design principles of the game.
Turning Overwatch back to 6v6 tomorrow doesn't change it. It doesn't. And big picture, none of this matters. It genuinely doesn't. And it is kind of sad. That being said, though, that doesn't mean they should stop trying. I want that to be very clear. Just because I think if they made changes tomorrow to add hero bans, to add 6v6, to add all these things, I don't think that changes public perception. I don't think that changes the fact that you have the biggest competitor you could have ever dreamed of sitting at your back door. That doesn't mean you should stop trying. Just because you have now the biggest obstacle and the biggest challenge that has ever been presented to you, your company, your game, your franchise, does not mean you should stop trying to make it.
Look at this motivational speech he's going off right now. And I think there is an opportunity for them to gain some momentum with somewhat of a different type of hero shooter, because there is a lot of new players to this genre that never played Overwatch before that might like it. Now, the problem is if they do a lot of the crazy wacky things that Marvel Rivals is trying to do, can they actually compete on the same plane? I'm not so sure they can reverse the clocks and change the PR of Overwatch in time to really make a difference. Like, I'm worried for Overwatch personally.
Get better. 6v6 tomorrow wouldn't save it. Hero bans tomorrow wouldn't save it. There needs to be more.
No, it's the fun factor, man.
That being said,
it's not wacky enough. It's not over the top enough.
That being said, I do think that 6v6 feels way better than 5v5. And I think that the single tank format genuinely is so atrocious to gamers that it is no longer sustainable. And we really should seek other options. Whether that's 222, whether it's full open queue, whether it's 5v5 full open queue versus 6v6 full open queue. Other options need to be explored quickly, because it's going to take a long time for those to ever be implemented. But even if it's going to take a long time, I don't think that they should not try. I think they can do it.
Yo, for real, open queue.
I think they can absolutely
I think
pull it off.
Go back to open queue,
but they need to stop
open
being
queue
afraid.
Draft or bans, please.
Because if they stay in their current state any longer, and by any longer, I mean because this stuff will probably take a year or more to actually be implemented.
Well, the thing he's not remembering when he recorded this video is that they have been trying to compete with Marvel Rivals and been talking about all this. That's why the blog post does have a big thing coming up.
Considering development time, you're giving Marvel Rivals potentially a year of a head start on all of this stuff. And to keep implementing and to keep improving, you will fall so far behind. They need to start acting today so that in a year from now, we can see their results.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, even if I'm playing a lot of Rivals, I will always love Overwatch, and I will always want it to succeed. And you should too. I think that we all need to take a look at the problems that are a little bit deeper than just, hey, let's go 2 tags. Because there's a lot deeper than that at this point. But yeah, I figured this video needed to be made. Because I think it's time. I think it's time.
Yep. Great video, Flats. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think when you learn about design, like Steve Jobs, I believe, was the one who said that you have to make the product that the consumer doesn't even know they want yet, basically. And when you just listen to the direct feedback and try to adjust your product based on feedback, you don't know when you're going to erode away the things they liked to begin with just to try to adjust to the things they say they want, which as a principle I knew in 2019. I think parts of the developer team did know that. It's just unfortunately they compromised on certain things as they were multitasking towards making the game they really wanted to make, and then they kind of had a pencils down moment in the development of Overwatch 2 where they had to do something, right? So we got role passives and 5v5 and all of this, and a lot of it was a marketing gimmick. They really never knew how to properly service Overwatch at any point. It was a launch anomaly, almost an accident. And then I hated the way that they dealt with Overwatch 1 the entire time, which was hard to gain any momentum in the first couple years because there was so much shine on Blizzard for finally releasing a game that everyone gave them lots of allowances. Well, now they have the opposite problem where we could not have had more of a 180 on their PR representation. They were once seen as the golden child of gaming. They couldn't do any wrong. Jeff Kaplan was loved by everyone. Then he leaves the company, the lawsuits hit, and no one has any faith in Blizzard. And in fact, even when they do good things, it doesn't really get put in the best possible light. Everything is negative. And so really, I don't know what Overwatch can do at this moment anymore, guys. But I'll tell you this. I have not played ranked in Overwatch since Marvel Rivals officially came out, and I refuse to play it until hero bans come in. I don't know if I want to cover this game anymore. I haven't uploaded in a while, and the reason is because I'm having a bit of a soul-searching moment. What do I want to do in the rest of my career? Because I really feel like I don't owe Overwatch anything. And while the Overwatch 2 player base largely hates me because I'm deemed the guy who defends 5v5, which isn't quite true, my standpoint was everything Flats just said about why 6v6 isn't enough. That's what it always was. But I did a poor job communicating that, and I found it difficult to really communicate what I meant because my ideas are so away from anybody else's, right? The things that I pointed out in 2019 about the trajectory of what this game was going to do, no one got then and didn't really get until Marvel Rivals came out. And then all of my friends are like, oh yeah, I actually see exactly what you meant the entire time, right? It's so much deeper than the number of players on the field. It's how do we want the game to interact? What do we want it to reward? And what do we want it to be about? And I gotta be honest, I have felt so abused by the Overwatch community that I have done so much for. I don't know if I want to be part of it anymore, is the real answer. To have put in so much work over the years, to not have any respect, it seems, because I didn't just hop on the contrarian point of view to bash Blizzard, when they're really just trying their best in a way that I don't think they should do either, because they're listening to everybody at once, which accomplishes nothing, but they are listening to you. I don't know. I just think they're screwed, guys. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comment section down below. I've been Frito for...